Welcome back, everybody. This is your host Harneha Gulati and you're watching Parvasi TV. Today we are celebrating 16 years of Parvasi Radio, at the same time the launch of Parvasi TV. Our next guest is amazing. I don't need to give his introduction. He's a man of his words. He's always stood by the community and he works for the community. Mr. Jagmeet Singh.
Hey, thank you so much.
It's so good to have you in our studio.
It's good to see you again, and it's good to be here.
Absolutely. And today we're launching Parvasi TV. It's going to be a 24-hour news channel, but first and foremost, we're going to have live Kirtan from Nankana Sahib from tomorrow. It's the first news channel to ever do that. How do you feel about that?
Very exciting. I was saying that there is this vision and dream of a Sanja Punjab, the fact that people that speak Punjabi are very connected, and the idea of connecting the distance by having Nankana Sahib and Kartarpur Sahib streaming Kirtan is a beautiful way to bring people together. So it's amazing. It shows unity, and it's a beautiful thing to see in these difficult times.
You've known Mr. Rajinder Saini and his family, and obviously the Parvasi family, for a long time. You see his dream coming true. What do you think about him? What do you think about the organization in itself?
Well, one of the things that I've always said is that people need information, and people need information in the medium, in the way that is best to connect with them, which is often in the language they speak most comfortably. And so what Parvasi as a media group has been able to do is give people information in a way that people can actually understand and consume and connect with, at a time when we know there's a lot of misinformation. WhatsApp sometimes spreads misinformation. People see a post and then share it, and it turns out to be it's not true. So having someone that's reliable, credible, trustworthy, like Parvasi as a media group and Sani Saab, it gives people that confidence that they can rely on the information they're getting. And it's so vital and so important.
Well, since you are here, I'm obviously going to ask you some political questions also. So how do you think we are dealing with the COVID crisis as far as the latest funding is also concerned? The funding released by PM, $2 billion for the back to school program.
Well, this is something that we called for. We've been calling for this for months. We know that parents are really worried. They want their kids to go back to school, but they want to know their kids are safe. And kids, I'm sure, want to go to school and spend time with their friends, but they also want to go somewhere where it's safe. And we know that provinces are having a hard time coming up with the funds to make schools safe enough. And so we've said the federal government should play a role, should help out and provide some funding. The federal government has the best access to funds and should help out. So we've been calling for it for months. And then the day that we announced our press conference calling for this help, the government then announced it. So I think we should hold more press conferences. Maybe we can get the government to do more. But what I also have to point out, though, is that schools and school boards needed this money months ago so they could actually use it. I'm hoping there's still enough time for the schools to take that funding and then do what all the experts are saying, and what the school board is saying, which is smaller classroom sizes, is one of the best ways to protect kids.
Oh, some of the representatives of the leading party, they're already saying that, oh no, we were waiting for the provincial governments to come forward to us. We were waiting for their responses so that we could release the funding or announce the funding.
Well, what we said is that the funding could have been announced. Yeah. We know that there was a need. The funding could have been set aside and said, here's money the provinces can access. That could have been done months ago. There was no reason to delay that. But I'm happy that after a lot of pressure, we've actually seen this move forward. But we know that when it comes to the COVID-19 response, throughout the response, the Liberal government's response has been to leave some people behind. They left students behind, seniors behind, people with disabilities. And as New Democrats, my job has been to fight for everybody. And we've been making sure that no one is left behind. So I'm proud that our vision of a more inclusive response, one that helps out everybody and makes sure people aren't left behind, has been successful. I know there's still so much more work to do. Now we see CERB is going to end at the end of August. People want to know that they're still going to get help, those who can't go back to work. So we're fighting for changes to EI. That the government now has announced some of those changes, but we want to be back in Parliament to pass the legislation so that people can get that help.
I know that you've been talking about a universal payout program. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Well, one of the things that we've seen with COVID-19 is that everyone is impacted.
Right.
And instead of coming up with a plan that gave help to some and not others, our vision was, let's give help to everyone who needs it, and then anyone who doesn't need it, we can tax it back next year.
Right.
Our vision was, let's get help to people quickly, as efficiently as possible, and to everyone who needs it. And then we can make sure those who don't need it, we can tax it. The government's response was to give it to just the minimum as possible, the least people possible. And we had to fight to expand it every step of the way. And I think similarly moving forward, we need to have something like an EI system that's broad enough to cover everyone when they need it. Right now, EI only works for about 40% of Canadians. So the other 60% can never use EI if they ever get sick or if they can't go to work or if something comes up or they lose their job. And so I really believe in something that is there for everyone, a social safety net where any worker, whether they're a contract worker or a freelance worker, someone who works precariously, has shifts that are unsteady or not stable, that person should also get help. And so that's our vision, that we should have something in place so that if any worker ever falls on difficult times, they can get some help so they can pay their bills, take care of their family, and then find another job.
As you can see, this is Jagmeet Singh, our community leader, our leader with us, who's always standing with us. And with that, we'll take a short commercial break. I know there was something kept aside for small businesses, but I have interviewed some small business people. They are not happy because they're not eligible for it. So I don't know what kind of program was set aside for them, because it is very challenging. Some of the business people, they're not even eligible. Their businesses are not eligible and they are suffering because, one, there are no people coming to their business, so they are almost on the verge of shutting down. And number two, they're not eligible for funding. And at the same time, we keep saying that we need to go to our local shoppers. We need to go to our local people to buy stuff, to trade stuff, to do anything, and forget about the production of any material like that. If we can't have any operations going on, how do we expect to produce anything?
That's right. So a couple of things we need to do. One is, when small businesses have been saying that the programs are too strict and they can't actually apply for it. So we've said they need to be more flexible so that small businesses can actually access the programs that are put in place. There's no point in having a program if the businesses we want to help can't actually access the program.
That is correct.
So what we push for is modifying the wage subsidy and other programs to make them more flexible so that a business that may be feeling a downturn but doesn't fit the exact definition that's been previously set aside, they should also be able to be helped out. So we've asked for a broadening of the criteria. Another thing that we've seen for a lot of small businesses is commercial rent.
Right.
The rent that they have to pay is so high, but there's no support for them to be able to pay the rent. And the program that was announced was one where the landlord has to apply for it, and the tenant really doesn't have any control or say over whether they get the help or not. So we've been saying there's got to be a different way to do that so that the tenant, the small business that's renting out in a plaza, that can't afford to pay their rent because they've seen a big reduction in their income, they need to be able to have a way so they can actually apply for that help. So that's another thing we think that people, businesses particularly, and people need help with the rent, and we need to put in place a program to help them.
It's pretty confusing because landlords who own the plazas have that power to do that, but the other people who are actually landlords, they don't have much power. I'm actually speaking to some people who have tenants. They're not going to pay the rent. They don't want to pay the rent. And one, they say they don't have jobs. Oh, we're getting CRB, we're living off CRB. You should also go apply CRB. They're like, well, we're also going to college, we're also going to work. Obviously, our challenges are different, but you are a tenant for a reason because we need rent from you. So the rent relief program, it's not too satisfying and too equally implemented, because there are a lot of people who are in a dilemma. They can't kick them out and they can't even keep them.
Right, and that's why one of the things we've said is that what we could do, and the federal government has the power to do, is to put a freeze on mortgages. So that if people that own their properties, own a building, if there's a freeze on mortgage, then it would be easier to have a freeze on rent. And that's something that we have the power to do. We can actually use the federal government's powers to make sure that banks have to put a freeze on mortgage. That's one idea. But the rent relief program has clearly shown to be a failure. It doesn't work because the landlord has to apply for it. It should be that the tenant can access it directly and they can use that to pay their rent. That's something that we've been calling for because a lot of people can't afford to pay their rent. A lot of businesses are looking at these massive bills for their rent, but they haven't seen the revenue because people aren't going to shop as much. They haven't been going to the stores as much. And some of the businesses have been forced to close for a lot of healthcare, yoga studios, and gyms. They actually couldn't operate.
Absolutely.
And so it's been very difficult, and we have to put in place some support to help those businesses out.
What is the next thing the NDP is pushing for the federal government to take an action on?
Well, there's three things. One is we know that for a lot of families are worried about school, so we want to continue to push for help to get kids back to school safely. Childcare is a big piece for a lot of people. They need access to childcare. And we've seen a stat recently, where women have their participation in the workplace has dropped to the lowest in 30 years. So 3 decades of more and more women going to work has now fallen because mainly they say lack of access to childcare. because often the child responsibility falls on women, and if there's no affordable childcare, many families say, well, the cost is too high for childcare, I'll just stay at home. And it's often women that are staying at home, and then they're losing their earning potential, their career development. So that's one thing. We want to make sure women can access affordable childcare that's universal. And then finally, we want to see that change to EI at the end of CERB. We want to see something that is broad, that helps all workers. If someone does get sick, they should have paid sick leave, something that we've fought for. And the Liberal government has mentioned that they would do it, but we need to see real concrete details. Not prorogating as Prime Minister Trudeau did. He prorogated, basically stopped Parliament, shut down Parliament. We actually need Parliament to be open so that we can actually get these changes in place so families can know what's going to happen. A lot of families are worried. And when you don't know what's going to happen in the future, it's hard to make plans, it's hard to predict. And we want to get rid of some of that worry and fear by giving them a concrete vision around this is what's going to happen, this is how you can plan. And so that's something that we want to see happen.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and I really hope we see you more in the studio with more in-depth discussions. And thank you so much for taking time out and coming to our studios.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.